Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Erika Heald, and it's time for Content Chat. Today, we're having a really fun conversation. It's one of those things that's an outcropping of an IRL conversation I was having with my guest, Maliha Khan, and we were just having so much fun talking about that messy middle of marketing and realizing how much interconnection we have with what we each do, that we said, oh my gosh, we totally have to have this be a full-fledged content chat. And so here you are. And thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. So for folks who have not met you at the many marketing events that I know I've attended with you, tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okie dokie. My name is Maliha. I'm the founder and CEO of Connect the Dots and Concept Studio. Essentially, I help people bridge the gap between strategy and execution, what we're going to be talking a lot about today. And so I'll cut it short so we can get to it.
I love it. Let's just start there then. You know, I think I've heard the messy middle because we certainly would talk about it a lot at any of the big companies I worked at, where we'd spend all the time putting together that brand strategy. And then people were like, well, why on earth is why is this so hard? Why isn't it perfect? Yes. So let's just dive in. And, you know, how do you define the messy middle, and why is it something that we need to be thinking about?
So to me, the messy middle is what happens after we build out that beautiful strategy deck and everybody signs off on it. But then when it's time for execution to deliver results, things fall apart somewhere in the middle there. And that's when things start to drift, especially the meaning of things. Like, what does the strategy mean anyway, right? Yeah. And so, you know, if you have like a kickoff meeting, typically what happens is everybody leaves aligned, or so they think they do. And then the work moves through teams and tools and timelines, and people start interpreting things a little bit differently. And that's where all the gaps start to show up, right?
100%. I mean, I know I've gone through the exercises like of defining a brand voice, and then ended up where content that 100% was aligned to that brand voice was not getting approved by the person that was insistent on some of the attributes. And I'm going to call out the attribute that I don't ever let anyone put in because of this. And that is irreverent. Okay. Irreverent is something that every single startup that wants to disrupt an industry, they want to have irreverent in there, yet nobody is willing to actually be irreverent. They're not willing to tweak sensibilities. They're not willing to, you know, unless it's something where they're also willing to go hire Ryan Reynolds. In general, they're just not willing to go there with irreverent.
Right.
The only irreverent brand I can think of that I've ever worked with was, you know, at the KPBS On-Air magazine when I was in college. I was an intern there, and the editor was irreverent. And his was definitely towards the sharp, snarky side of the stick, and not just the unusual disrupting things.
Yeah, completely understand you.
So it's like you think that you're aligned, but if all you have is that strategy document, you're not aligned. There's so many ways that things can go sideways.
Well, and let's be honest, like a lot of our strategy decks collect dust, right? It's like the biggest deal at the beginning of a project. And then as things start to take a turn, pivot, and all of this progress takes place, like nobody ever refers back to it. And so then it just starts collecting dust, and then teams are scratching their heads going, what are we doing here?
It's because we, you know, people forget the step of, you know, operationalizing the strategy, which is creating all of the support, be it guidelines, templates, defined workflows, messaging that supports the strategy, and things like hiring the right resources. Like if you're trying to be an upscale, bespoke brand, yet you're telling your content team that they can't hire any freelancers and that they need to use stock photography and Canva. Well, if you don't have a designer on your staff, you're probably not going to be able to, you know, actualize that strategy.
No, you won't. And so we talk about that a lot in terms of like, translation is super, super important. And a lot of times content strategies break down when things aren't translated correctly.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the really like most common areas where you see that people have a strategy that they're just not able to put into to play? Like, what are some of the big stumbling blocks that you see over and over again?
I don't think anyone ever comes to the table with like a completely like wrong strategy, right? Like at the end of the day, strategy is just like your best guess at how you think you need to kind of navigate. And most of the time, like our intention and our heart is in the right place. But I think the problem that we run into really is that either we're not clear about some of the decisions that were made within that strategy deck. Okay. And so, you know, especially with creative teams, I'm sure you've seen this. Creative teams are like, we could do strategy. We do strategy. And a lot of times then it's like, well, yeah, but this is a different type of strategy. We're talking messaging, we're talking content. And a lot of times there are times where, as controversial as I sound right now, creative teams don't really understand the full extent of that. But it's just a matter of having a conversation and saying, like, we made these decisions because of XYZ information. We've already, like, you know, dotted our I's and crossed our T's on all of this. And so outside of all of this information, if you have an idea, feel free to bring it back to us. But really, there was a lot of thought and a lot of caution and a lot of just like holistic thinking that went into everything that is inside the strategy deck. And so I think when we're transparent and have that conversation with the entire team, that you're more than welcome to bring ideas to the table. Let us tell you everything that we've already like checked off, right? And if there's a client involved, like this was a request from a client, we know this isn't the way that we would like to go about this, but it's a client request and this is why we're going to have to move forward with it. Whatever those reasons look like, I think it's really important to translate that for everybody else, so we're not spinning our wheels and wasting time going back to ideas that have already been checked off. Because at the end of the day, I really believe that the team is trying to get to the same destination together. Everybody just has a different piece of the pie, if that makes sense.
It totally does. And it's because your average person is going to sit through an hour meeting, maybe, or maybe it's just going to be half an hour at a marketing all hands where they hear what the content strategy is. And then maybe they get a copy of the deck. Maybe they don't even get a copy of the deck to take back with them.
Yeah.
And they get told, you know, okay, so we're all aligned now, right?
Yeah.
When in reality, what your team needs at a minimum is a copy of that deck that is annotated with the footnotes that link out to the references. Absolutely. So that you can see, here's the client conversation transcript where we, you know, really heard this, that, you know, caused us to realize this is a big pain point for this audience, or here's a link out to the brand voice chart that maps to this. Here's a link out to our ebook template that we designed that we want you to use. It's like, give people tools and have it all be in one place. Do not have 8 different spreadsheets and several file services, where everyone has to go hunting, because they're not going to.
They're not. I mean, you'd be in a good spot if like everybody walked into the kickoff meeting having like done homework prior to the kickoff meeting. But a lot of times when you walk into the kickoff, right, maybe some folks have read and gone through the deck and other folks are just walking in there blind, trying to get that information right then and there, right? And so, and everyone has their own reasons, like people were busy, they couldn't get to the deck, things like that. So I really do think you're absolutely right with, if we build the deck with all the proper examples and information that we need, that just sets people up for success.
And hearkening back to something you said just a couple minutes ago, having that transparency and letting people weigh in is so important versus just saying, here it is, and it is set in stone, and we won't deviate from it until we hire a new CMO and they create a new strategy. It's, because there can be a huge disconnect between what management thinks is possible and how long management might think it takes to do a thing, and what that actually looks like on the plate of the people doing the work. because there's very rarely enough transparency into what the real workload looks like for the creative teams in particular, so they can get overloaded and bogged down, and then they're not going to be able to do their best work.
Which, like, the best ways that I've seen people navigate making sure that we don't lose things in translation is having a pre-kickoff before the kickoff with department heads, okay, and saying, we don't have everything nailed down yet, but we're just letting you know this project is coming. This is the ask. This is what we need to get done. And so can you kind of tell us how many hours your department's going to need and who you think can get the job done from your team? And then in the kickoff, you don't have those department heads. You have the person that's actually doing the job in the kickoff. And
they're already on board with it.
They're already on board because guess what? Their department head has had a conversation and said, let me brief you on this, right? Yep. And so they're already primed for this project. And so by the time they get to the kickoff and we have more information, right? And we have this like great brief. And a lot of times like the brief totally dismisses the strategy, but the best case scenario is the strategy piece. There should be a section in the brief that is specifically strategy, and like strategy should be included when it's time to build out that brief, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't leave them off. I've been in situations where like, for example, agency side, like account team thought they could just handle the brief. Strategy didn't get a seat at the table. And then strategy is like, wait a minute, this is not at all matching with what the strategy deck looks like and what needs to happen. And so already you have a mistranslation issue, right? At the start of the project, which is the worst thing possible. So I think just taking these little steps, as much as, like it may be time consuming, it just sets you up for success down the road.
So we've talked about a few of them, a few of the things that, can kind of be indications that a content strategy is going to struggle in execution. And the big one being, not having those pre-conversations to understand what the reality of bringing something to life is going to look like. And, just having, making sure that you have lots of open lines of communication. I'm wondering if there are any other kind of warning signs that you've seen, like when you've been brought in when some work's already in progress from our content strategy and trying to help them execute, where you're like, ooh, I can see how this is going to be a problem.
Yeah. So I think it's when the teams are asking the same questions over and over again, or there have been situations where like, everybody might have access to the brief and was told go in and like put any questions that you might have and we'll go and get the right information, but then the questions don't get answered.
Yeah.
Or like the first internal review, you can tell that there's a disconnect when the work, it checks the boxes, but it was like the team did not really understand how the strategy was supposed to get implemented into the work. And what that normally results in is a lot of revisions, right? And as a project manager back in the day, one of the things that I saw really break the process down was the feedback for revisions was not what the creative team needed. Instead of being very prescriptive on, hey, this needs to change here, or this is a typo here, or this, logo needs to be placed a little bit higher with some more white space or whatever that looks like, right? Instead, we were starting to ask questions that go back to the discovery phase, frankly. Like it goes back to, wait a minute, why are we doing this way? And it's like, well, go back to the strategy deck, like go back to the brief. There was a reason. We don't need to be asking these questions now. If we are asking those questions, something got mistranslated.
Yeah.
And so those are the normal like pitfalls or like warning signs, if you will, on where translation didn't get translated correctly.
Totally. So with your content, hat on, but also with your project management hat on, in addition to making sure you've got those right people and do the pre-kickoff meeting, what are some other ways to really, help those teams that are going to be the ones actually bringing the strategy to life, to support them and make it easier for that to actually happen?
So one of the things that I've seen on projects that seem to do a really great job at avoiding the messy middle is that the strategy team really takes a lead and says, hey, copy team, art team, would you like to set up like a quick 15-20 minute powwow? You can go ahead and detail and ask us like questions about anything within the strategy that you may need more clarity outside of what's been discussed in the pre-kickoff or the kickoff, right? And then the beautiful thing that comes from that is it really turns into this amazing collaborative process where it's like, I'm supporting you, you're supporting me by making sure that execution gets nailed down. And those have been some of the best situations where then what happens is like your copy and art team feel very comfortable to come back to strategy, right? And now the door's been opened and now we can have this dialogue. And sometimes having understood strategy a little bit more deeply, your copy and art team and beyond that can come back to you with actually some really good tweaks, or there might be, for example, I used to work in pharma. And so in pharma, you would have to go back to the drawing board, not because you wanted to, but because legal was like, nope, this isn't going to fly. This isn't going to fly. And so what ended up happening is this beautiful relationship where everybody was brainstorming to solve the problem and get the job done. And I think that's really what helps push us forward, is that if everybody gets an opportunity to brainstorm and kind of work it out with you, and feels comfortable enough to have the dialogue, that moves us along way more than, ending up with mistranslation and everybody interpreting the brief on their own, everybody interpreting the strategy deck, no matter how many times we think there's no way this could get misinterpreted.
There always is.
There always is.
Well, especially in scenarios when you have a really large organization with maybe multiple business units in centralized marketing, or partially centralized marketing, handing down brand proclamations from on high without having talked to the people who are using them. I mean, I used to hate creative briefs because I had been given a creative brief to use that, was for the B2C side of the business. B2B had no input into it. It wasn't the right stuff to be asking me. It wasn't, relevant. It's something I'm like, do you really want me to just make up messaging points? We haven't done our messaging yet. I don't know what the message is for this. This is a regulatory communication. Yeah. We have to send it. And I could tell you, I'd frustrate them, but I was frustrated. I'm like, don't make me use this irrelevant, brief. And I eventually got them, to create a brief that was relevant for the B2B side of things. But, initially I was just I pushed back so hard because I was like, why are you making me waste my time filling out this brief that is not going to be at all helpful?
No. Nope, not at all.
That's why I'm I'm the proponent of having channel specific creative briefs. So that way, based upon what it is the person's trying to do, they're being asked the right questions. So they have all of those strategic things up at the top. They have their audiences, not every audience the company serves, but for that channel that they're talking about, for that one, who are the people they're talking to for that channel? What are the objectives for that channel? And you're picking from those things. So that way you're not just being given a blank slate and told, go create something. Because you're not going to create something good that way.
Some of the best things that I would love to do in a meeting is not just talk about who we're building for, but who we're not building for, right? And that's something that we leave out a lot, right? We always talk about who this is for, But I feel like, part of that transparency that I was kind of talking about is also saying like, hey, we've already taken a look at who this is not for. These are those folks. So keep this in mind when you are working on execution. And I think that also makes a big impact as well.
Before we move on to talk about AI, I did want to ask if you have any like specific frameworks or templates that you've used for this kind of like forming stage of content strategy that's helped people kind of get going.
Yeah, so I do have a framework. Right now it's called my 3 E's until I figure out a better name for it.
3 E's is good. I'm partial
yeah.
E.
Of course you are. But really it's built around, a lot of times what I've seen is like, we're going to build the plane while we're flying it. And that approach never works.
That's right.
And so I think a really easy way to kind of get out of the messy middle is to first stop and think about exclude, which is subtracting things. A lot of times when we're stuck, we're like, let's add this, add that, add this. And what ends up happening is you're already stuck in the messy middle, and now you're adding more complication to it. No. The goal is really to remove things so it becomes clear on what you need to do. And then the second E is called establish. And so after we've started excluding things and subtracting things, we need to kind of establish what is the right step moving forward now that we can kind of see a little bit more clearly. And last but not least, evolve, because after you exclude and after you establish, naturally you're going to need to evolve. The problem or the project in this case, right, is going to shift. And a lot of times it's because along the way we had, maybe different pieces of information come to the surface, or, certain situations changed when we started subtracting things that we thought we originally needed. And so naturally with that, you're going to need to evolve, and that should take you out of the messy middle.
I love that. And it's just so true. Like, you've got to always look at the strategy as being a living document, because you don't control the marketplace and you don't control your audience needs.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to shift it. And some people use that as an excuse to not document their content strategy. And that's a pretty lame excuse, because you're not going to be able to get everyone on the same page if you don't have something there. And if you're not creating it in Illustrator, it's not a big lift. Go in and make some small tweaks and edits. We all can do that.
I mean, it could be a Canva file for all I care, right? As long as it's documented somewhere, because when it's not documented, and then like, think about it right now, like how many people are changing jobs, right? And so you're losing certain pieces with certain people because it wasn't documented. And so then where does that leave you as a brand? You can't stop and go just because you have, people coming and going. At the end of the day, you still have to show up as a brand. So that documentation is so critical.
And it helps all of the teams. Because I know I've been in a situation where layoffs have impacted my boss, and where, I've had to take on elements of their job. And of course, they thought that they were indispensable, and that one of the ways that they were indispensable was by documenting nothing. So that way they were the only one who knew where things were and how to do what have you, which then meant IT gave me access to all of their files and their email, a thing I did not want. To go in and try and, and recover it and figure it out. And I know not all organizations have the support for going in to create like risk related materials, documentation for how all things, happen. But if you can, in any situation, having those workflows across your organization defined, but especially critically within marketing, when you go forth and you actually define all of the how the things work, then you're not in that situation where if somebody wins the lottery and doesn't come to work ever again, that you have zero idea how to, you know, send out the email newsletter. Because that happens. It happens a lot, and that's silly.
Yep, absolutely. The part that kills me the most is when ideal customer profiles haven't been built. And I'm just like beside myself. Like, how did we get here? Because clearly you know who you're marketing to, but no one's taken the time to document it. And it would make it so much easier for others on the team, especially like departments that you don't pull in often.
Yeah.
For example, agency side, like you pull in QA and quality assessment, and you're like, they're only involved when it's a website project or it's like a mobile app, right? They otherwise don't touch the brand at all. And so it's just making sure that we are really putting our best foot forward with providing the right information so we avoid having a translation problem and avoid the messy middle.
And you can't be bringing AI into your marketing mix and try to be using AI as part of your workflows if you don't have any documentation, because then you're letting the AI decide. And the AI doesn't know your brand, doesn't know what you think is good, and is frankly going to just give you the most mediocre, middle of the road, you know, path forward, because that's literally what it's been trained to do.
Yep. I mean, the way that I like to explain to people, and I've been training a lot of people lately on AI, especially with AI in marketing, and how do we build our brand voice guidelines along those lines. And one of the things that I say front and center is your output is only going to be as great as your input. If your input's not that great, don't expect the right results. And so a lot of times I'm just pointing to people and saying, you think you're being clear on the ask, but I think you need to sit with it for 10, 15 more minutes and kind of think about, really, what do you want? Do you really want an email? Or would you rather benefit from a report that you could, summarize why you need more funding, and then take that report to leadership and make a case for it? Like, is that email really going to solve the problem, or is that just your Band-Aid solution?
And frankly, the AI can help you figure that out. That's what's so great, is it does have all of that information. So instead of you coming to it the way that people come to an agency and telling it, give me this thing that I want, tell it you have a problem you're trying to solve, and have it brainstorm with you, or have it look at what you've put together and say, pick this apart as though you are the person I'm giving it to, who is, this role in this kind of a company. What would you, expect to see here that's not here, or what would sway you? It can tell you all these things and help you make your pitch better.
Yep. So I actually teach a lot of people on like the basics of prompting. And like the number one thing I'll say is, hey, like strong prompts are going to get you the best results, and weak prompts are frankly a waste of your time. And so I built a tool called Prompt Coach on my website. It's free for like everybody to use. Essentially, it's kind of like a form that you're filling out with all sorts of information, like SEO keywords, brand voice, context, role, some of the normals that you need when you're prompting, right? And then it like has you dial in on what is the ask, and providing like audience and must avoid, must include. So there's all sorts of fields there. They don't all have to be filled out, but what happens is it tells you when you have enough information for a great prompt. And it also cues you like, hey, you probably need to add some more information. Then at the bottom, you get the prompt, you copy it, and you paste it into whatever learning model. And I cannot even tell you, when every single time when people use the tool, they get like this amazing output. And it really goes to show, this is why we need to include as much information as we can when we're using with AI. And so now let's talk about strategy, right? If you have a strategy that's broken or outdated, right, it's only going to amplify that. It's only going to make it worse. And so that's why it's really important that we get really clear with what are we hoping to, end with, and then use AI as a collaborative thinking partner, and not so much a take over and do all the content for me, right? Some sort of content machine here.
Because it's such a great content coach, and it can help every single person on your team bring your brand to life in ways that you haven't even thought of, and make you a stronger writer. I love having it tell me how I can tweak things to make it stronger.
And I mean, anyone that's been following Andy Crestodina knows the man has such amazing prompts that will literally allow you to gut check your strategy against a specific customer profile.
Yep.
I mean, we are just in a whole different time now, and I feel like we're able to use AI to really gut check us wherever needed. And I think that's how we should be using AI. We should be using AI to help us maybe see things that we're not able to see, or, understand things from a different angle, and really use it as a thinking partner. One of my favorite things that I love to do is to ask the tool, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT or whatever that looks like, and just say, what are 5 questions I should be asking you, but I'm not asking you?
Yep.
And it's amazing, like how they're just such great questions. They're like really high level thinking questions. They're not like, use me for execution level questions. They're like, use me to elevate your thinking. And that's what I think is really amazing for teams right now, is that we can gut check things. We can run things through AI to see if we should be thinking about it from a different angle, and add like a customer profile with that. And man, you'd be surprised the things that it will bring up for you.
Totally. And if you tell it not to make things up and to instead ask you questions, if it needs more information, it will do that. So then you're not going to get hallucinations. You're not going to get things stolen from other people. You're going to get things. You're going to get a response that is 100% relevant because it's asked for clarification where it was otherwise going to make assumptions. And just imagine if human beings did that.
Yes. Boy, where would we be?
Now, on the flip side of that, I think, where I'm seeing teams over relying on AI, and it makes me sad, is I'm seeing a lot of really generic AI generated social content. I see it on LinkedIn. We call it Broetry. Even though sometimes it's ladies posting it too. It's, gender non-specific, this Broetry. But it's a very specific style with lots of brevity, many line breaks, very little content, absolutely nothing specific, nothing speaking anyone's experience, but it's just out there to make somebody feel like they sounded smart on the internet.
Yeah.
And then it's even worse on social, because what we're seeing right now is there's so many people creating AI generated images and video that they're not marking as such. And then people get really mad. Well, or they don't even notice it, which is actually really scary.
But did you see what LinkedIn started doing? LinkedIn now has like a little icon, and if you like hover over it or click on it, it'll tell you if this is somebody's original content or if it's AI generated. I'm like, that's a game changer.
Facebook will never do that, and that's such a huge problem
because they have Meta AI, and they're not ever going to do that.
It's so terrible. It makes me really ragey every time I'm on the platform.
Yeah. But I think going back to what you're saying, like everyone keeps talking about AI slop, right? Like, oh my gosh, we're seeing so much AI slop. But AI slop is not an AI issue. It's a human issue. Like 100%. I tell people in my trainings, I'm like, I'm sorry to break this to you, but it's a you problem.
That's right.
Like, you're just not using it correctly. And so I think going back to how you're talking about generic content, So I have a tool that I developed that's the brand voice builder on my website, connectthedots.com. And like essentially you can upload samples of your work. What I recommend to people is like give it your URL, give it like your social media pages, though a couple of times LinkedIn sometimes can be a little bit difficult, and Facebook, believe it or not, can be a little bit difficult for it to scrape recently. This was a recent change. And but go ahead and provide all of the URLs, and then I say upload like direct mail pieces if you have them, signage, like PDFs of that, or like photos. Photos are great too, right? Like screenshots of social media posts if it comes back and says like, hey, I can't scrape LinkedIn, which it probably will. Any type of examples that you can provide it on how your brand shows up.
Yep.
And if you ask it to produce brand voice guidelines for you, I'm telling you, it will blow your mind away. And so either people fall into two different camps. The first camp is like, your brand is showing up as 5 different personalities. I'm not really sure what to tell you. And then the second camp is where most people end up in, where it will actually give you like a 4-page document that is your brand voice guidelines. And in my trainings, one of the things that we talk about is that how to take that brand voice guideline now, and either you can build a custom GPT and use that for your content creation purposes, or if you need to just start a chat on like blog content, right, and you just want to keep it going, you can just attach it as an example and say, here are my brand voice guidelines. And then it gets even better because the brand voice guidelines are so in detail that they'll say, write like this, but don't write like this. Use this vocab, but avoid this vocab.
Yep.
And those guidelines come in handy when you're setting up a brand kit on Canva, right? Because now Canva's changed it to where before your brand voice used to be one paragraph that you plopped in there. Now you can actually add guidelines and say, do this, but don't do this, because of Canva AI kind of using your brand kit to generate writing, designs and things like that. And so I really think right now it's critical for every brand to develop their brand voice guidelines if they have not already, regardless of how you decide to do that, using this custom GPT or your own process. And then making sure that when we're using AI to produce content, we're providing those guidelines, right, in some way, shape, or form, to avoid running into like the same type of copy. I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of times if you're working on like some sort of a description or social media post, the first sentence will say, most people, blah, 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 if you use AI.
Or in these uncertain times, or in today's digital landscape.
Or like delve and impact and soul. The one time it told me that my brand had a lot of heart and soul, I said, I don't even know what this means. Like, explain.
Like Hall & Oates, I have Hall & Oates. I'm 80s pop music. I don't think so.
I'm like, I need you to like explain why you're using the word soul for, like, I just don't think that matches my brand. And so I think that's why it's really important for us to have those brand voice guidelines in place.
And it'll make it easier for you to train and onboard humans to your team too. It's not just that we're doing these things for AI. You're going to be working with freelancers. You're going to be working with agencies. You're going to have new hires. Having things documented means they're going to have a much better onboarding experience, because it's actually really lame to be brought on board in any kind of a marketing situation and to ask for onboarding tools, to ask for brand guidelines and to understand what good looks like, and have the person on the other side of the desk just blink at you. That's like not good. No one likes that.
No, nobody likes that.
So I think a big thread through everything we've been talking about today really is about AI works only with collaboration with the humans that are going to be using it for their purposes. So by giving that context and providing the documentation, the strategy, et cetera, around it, and then collaborating with the AI on various activities. So I'd love to hear a little bit more, because I don't think people talk enough about the human-centered AI when it comes to content marketing in particular. Everyone is so excited about agentic stuff, which frankly is really. I'm not either. I'm not going to give the AI all of my passwords and say have fun.
No, we've been talking about that at home a lot, about like, do we clear out the old laptop and let Claude Cowork do its thing and see what's possible? But I'm just not there yet. And what's funny is a lot of other content strategists that I know are like on the same boat. They're like, no, I would not want to give all access over. And the only reason why Claude Cowork is even on my radar is I really do think it could help small businesses a lot, which people aren't talking about too much. They're talking about how it helps enterprises.
Yeah.
And I definitely do see that. And the only reason I'm even considering playing around with it right now is because it asks permission, unlike some of the other tools out there that just have a mind of their own, frankly, and take over. So yeah, I'm all about, we keep hearing things about like how in 2 years most content is going to be AI generated, and like human produced content is going to be less than, but it's going to have more value because a human created it. All these different predictions, and only time will tell which ones are true and which ones aren't. But I think in the meantime, what I encourage people to do is, one, lock in your brand voice guidelines and make sure that when you're using it to generate content, you're keeping the customer as the main focus and not brand objectives, and not, because how many times do we have all these brand objectives and things that may have come to us from higher ups and things like that. But then at the end of the day, you're like, this is so out of character. Like, this will not drive the needle forward for customers. So, okay, but we've been told we have to do this, so I guess we have to do this. So I think a lot of times it's just about, giving AI the right information. First of all, brand voice guidelines. Second, if you have any data, AI is wonderful at, catching on to patterns and probability. And so any data to back it up will help really make sure that your results aren't just any mediocre results that anybody could have gotten, but they're really customized and tailored specifically for your situation.
And what's, to just play on that, that's also how it can be both true that humans are still going to have a really big role in creating content for their audiences, and the statement that most content will be created by AI, because a human is going to be able to now create, let's say, you're going to create an ebook, and you're going to create it for one specific audience using, illustrative language and examples and customer testimonials that are applicable to that one specific audience and their needs. And then you might be handing that off to the AI and say, all right, I created this in a modular manner. Now go ahead and create a version for this other audience, et cetera, et cetera. So then we'll be creating content that is more tailored. So yeah, the AI is creating the content, but they're doing so with a human piece of content that they're deriving what they're doing from, with those human insights about the audience and what matters to them as context that they're using to create the content.
And I really can't see us losing sight of that. Like, as much as I'm hearing about like AI generated content, I think what we need to kind of go a little bit deeper and talk about it and say, like, is it AI generated with human collaboration? Absolutely. I could see that happening, right? If that's what we're saying here. But I really don't want to picture a world where humans don't drive, and then we just have all of this AI content. And I can't tell you how many times now I scroll past posts where I can tell it's an AI generated image. And so, you know, I was actually very proud when I saw that LinkedIn icon, because it was my own original content from my Samsung phone. And it said that, like, like uploaded from Samsung. And I was like, whoo, okay, great. Like, I'm sure people think that the girl that's going around teaching everybody on AI usage is probably generating all of her content using AI, but
Yeah.
that's not the case. I really think it's a collaborative effort, and it should be.
And what's nice too is, in a way, some of the tools at least are helping make it easier, because when they're downloading images, sometimes they're outing themselves in the file naming convention, and you would be surprised. You would be surprised how frequently people who've passed things off as being 100% their own creative work do not notice that they have embedded images that clearly say that they were created by whichever image generator it was. And you're like, And then, they don't understand like how much that causes people to no longer trust you because you're a big liar pants.
Well, and then like, I know some people that may have used AI to generate a blog post, for example, and then they'll download it from ChatGPT, and they don't realize that within the file descriptions and details, it says ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So I'm like, how many students are getting busted that way? That's what I want to know. Like,
or people will copy and paste the whole thing, including the "would you like me to," where it gives you, helpful additional things you could explore.
Yes.
Or the weird formatting. There's so many actual ways that you can tell that something was not original. But at the end of the day, it only matters that it's not original if it doesn't reflect the human experience.
Absolutely.
Because I know Joe Polizzi, our mutual friend, he would tell you he doesn't care if something is AI generated or not. He cares if it makes him feel something. And if it doesn't have the human aspect in there somewhere, you don't can feel anything, because AI doesn't feel anything.
No.
It doesn't have lived experiences. So that's where you, the human, you have to be that collaborator and be leading with those experiences.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
So we don't have a ton more time today. We have a little over 10 minutes. But I would like to talk a little bit about operationalizing strategy across content teams, because I think this is the holy grail that everyone's after. This is where people want to get. And it is so hard for people to do it. And that's partially because of resources, because every team has its own budget and they have their own allotment of seats for whatever the tools are. And people get really cagey about all of these things. So I'd love to hear if you have any strategies that have worked for realistically getting, strategy operationalized across a larger organization.
What specifically within that?
How you get people to have like consistency with day-to-day output across the organization. So for example, everybody has to create emails, right?
Oh.
So, but the emails that your customer service team, your sales team, and your marketing team send out frequently all are completely different, even though they absolutely should all feel like they're coming from the same company. So like, how would you get those three groups on board so that way you don't have some that use formal language where it's, your title and your full name, and on second use it's your last name, versus other ones like, "Hey Bob, how's it going?" And like just the whole mess.
Yeah, so that's a systems issue in my mind, right? Because it's like, we know in terms of messaging what things resonate the most and which don't. And I feel like once we've kind of mapped out what all of that messaging looks like per content pillar, all the rest of the systems need to follow.
Yeah.
It can't be optional. Like it just has to be that way. Otherwise, again, we run into the same problem with brand voice, right? And take a look at some of the best brands and some of the best communication that lands in your inbox, and how most of the times those companies are the ones that sound the same. And so regardless of which email address at that company that email is coming from, 100% that yes, this is that same brand voice. And so I think we run that risk of decompartmentalizing, like just showing up again as 5 different people, as as the one person that got that result in one of my trainings. I was like, oh, we should talk after this. You don't want that.
Right.
You don't want to show up as 5 different people. And then think about what that does to your ideal customer profile too. Then there's all these segments, because certain people heard you a certain way, saw you a different way, right? Yeah. And so now that's kind of the expectation versus like the other 80% that saw you and heard you the way that they should have, right? And so I think it just lands you in the messy middle again. So my best advice on kind of operationalizing this is really just making sure that the leadership is on board and all of the right departments are on board to make sure that essentially the customer experience is what we want it to be, right?
Yeah. I've only seen this twice, I want to say, but it can really help if you do have the requirement that all of your salespeople and all of your customer service leaders have to get messaging certified. So that means that they have to train on the messaging, and they have to be able to sit with the CEO and the head of brand and be able to give, whatever the brand story is and what the pitch is, and that they have to know that messaging back and forth. And it is hard, and people are resistant to it, but you know how consistent everything is when you require that of folks, when they know that they are going to be quizzed on it, that there's going to be a grade, and that their grade needs to be passing, or they're going to have to keep on doing it, and nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, and like I think one of the most important things for example, sales teams is having like a positioning statement internally, right? And so that's a nice way of making sure that people don't have to flip through like this massive, well, in our situation, they could be multiple decks, right? And so, but I absolutely agree what you're saying is normally whenever the strategy shifted or messaging shifted, there was like an all hands that needed to happen to make sure that from now on, we are not saying this, and that this is the new way forward. And all of your departments need to kind of think about what that looks like for you. And then you can talk amongst yourselves to figure out what you need to do about it. But I definitely think like sales and marketing hand in hand, right? That relationship just has to exist. And I think that's one of the first places where things break down too. I feel like is when marketing wants to go about it a different way, and sales is not quite understanding how that impacts the way they're talking to customers. But I think every department that has to do with maintaining or building the customer experience is like the first priority at who needs to have maybe like a deeper look at what's shifted and why, and a follow-up if that's needed, but absolutely need to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Otherwise, you run the risk of having multiple brand personalities.
Yeah, because just because marketing owned the creation of that content strategy doesn't mean that's the only place it should be used, because you can't have multiple competing content strategies across your organization, because if you do, you're just going to have lots of rework. You're going to overwork your executive folks who you're looking to for approval. You're going to overwork all of those subject matter experts who need to give input.
Yeah.
And you're not going to end up in a good place. You're going to end up with 5 different personalities that you're putting out there. And so then you're never going to understand what messaging is landing with people, because if they're getting 5 completely different messages, there's no way of knowing which one brought them to you at all.
No, and that just muddies the water so much, because we talk a lot about testing, trial and error. But it's like what you're saying. How do you know what's broken if you have so many subsegments of a customer profile and each one is seeing a different brand voice carried out? That's a nightmare. That's what that is.
And that's when you go back to letting the AI guess what you should do, because your data is a mess. And everything's so fragmented. But there's so many better opportunities that can await you, better ways to put the AI to use.
Absolutely.
So as we close up, I'd love to hear if you have kind of like maybe 2 practical things that marketers can do today to kind of, if they're feeling stuck in that messy middle right now, to start to extricate themselves.
I think first thing is first, you have to figure out what are the things that you can reasonably subtract. If you can't make a list of 5 things, start with 1 thing. The more we're able to clear off a very messy desk, the more we're like able to kind of see through to what we really should be able to see. And it all starts with subtraction, right? Excluding things that aren't making sense. And then I think your next step after that is really focusing on establishing what should be in place, what good really should look like, what success looks like, and, charting that path forward with like, okay, now that we're done with this, we need to kind of focus on just establishing what good is supposed to look like and then move towards it. And, with anything, there's always going to be pivots. There's always going to be road bumps. There's always going to be new information surfacing, direction changing. But I think anytime we feel like we're in the messy middle, keep in mind that this is a loop with the 3 E's. It's not like a one and done. It's every time you feel like translation is off, okay, we need to go back to the 3 E's. What do we exclude? What do we establish? And then evolve going forward.
I love that. So folks want to get more of this kind of advice and access to the tools that you mentioned. Where can they go to find them?
Yep. So they can go to my website, connectthedots.com. It's spelled Khanect. It's a play off my last name. Love it. Just FYI on that. And follow me on LinkedIn as well. And I am regularly posting all sorts of little tidbits and snippets. And that should be a great place to go.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for continuing our conversation with today's content chat. I think you've definitely given people a lot of food for thought and some really concrete places to get started, because I think a lot of people are feeling trapped in the messy middle right now.
Yep. And I mean, that just like one of the things that I'll say is it's not just relevant for marketing. Like everything we talked about, obviously, it talks about how to bridge the gap between strategy and execution. But the term the messy middle can apply to life as well. Like I've been in the messy middle a few times now. So there's a way out of the tunnel.
100%. And I think that's amazing advice. So thank you again.
Awesome.
All right, everybody.
For having me.
Thank you. And we'll be seeing all of these resources in the recap and hope to have you on again in the future.
Awesome.
Thanks so much. Next time. Bye, everybody.
No.